when you're living in vows, and vows, like I said, are so powerful, and you're purifying every day, during the process of regretting the harm you've done, having compassion, doing the practice, vowing not to do again, this has a really powerful effect on our entire life. Because if we take the view that everything we meet and hear and see out there is the result of our own actions, instead of just seeing these, where this innocent victim of these ugly mice coming along into my house, we realize it's a karmic relationship. Then if you purify the karma and you live in vows, don't be surprised that that's enough to make the mice go away. You see my point? So it takes time to think this way, because the karmic view is very dynamic. Everything we think, like as Lama Zopa says, everything we experience out there is our own karmic appearance. So that we meet mice who harm our house because we have harmed them before. So if you live in vows and practice never harming, you won't ever meet mice who will need to be killed or not killed, because you've got the karma to be having a pure karmic appearance. So we can have trust in this approach. I mean, it needs thinking about and see what happens.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. It's very typical. That's a very common question for all of us, Yes. Yes, Barbara.
Thank you, Venerable, for your teaching.
Okay.
My understanding is that by the time the mind reaches the bardo, it's already been determined what the next.
Yeah, before you even stop breathing, they say. That's
Okay.
right. They say that, yes.
And I guess the question that I have is there anything that the mind can do in the bardo
Okay,
to
well,
influence?
yeah, okay.
I know externally,
I
prayers are
understand.
said.
Let me ask you a question. Have you noticed that you can do magical things in your dreams and change everything and fix yourself and not believe in what's happening in your dream and do some practice? Have you tried that out? Not possible, is it? Then forget the bardo, baby. So all those stories about the bardo, this book that's famous in the West, I mean, they're for high practitioners, honey child. You've got to first be conscious. I mean, most of us don't even know we're dreaming when we dream. We wake up and go, oh, I was dreaming. So even that's why it's so powerful to even to begin to think, may I see my dreams as dreams? So to be conscious that you're dreaming, then you can begin to have control. If you do it in your dreams, baby, then you'll do it in the bardo. Otherwise, just karma takes care.
Okay.
You see my point?
I do.
Because you're completely, we're not capable unless you're a great practitioner. I think that makes sense. You hear me?
It does, absolutely. I guess my follow-up question is, I know that other people for 49 days pray for the mind of the person that has passed.
Uh-huh.
What influence is that having?
What if what?
What influence is that having on the mind of where that, can that change?
Everything's dependent arising. Everything is dependent arising. So if you think of a Buddha, the Buddhas is like doctors, except they're high-level doctors who can help people on a more subtle level. Would you agree with that concept?
I do.
So then it's just like saying, well, you bring a person to a doctor and they give them a pill. How does that help? Well, it's interdependent. Doctors help people. They know how to help. Well, Buddhas know how to help, baby. They're clever people. Are you hearing me? As simple as that.
So then the trajectory that was determined on the way to the bardo
Can be changed.
can be changed.
Yeah, I mean,
Thank you.
Rinpoche is always so optimistic and he gives the option. There's 4 things it can be. And there's always something you can do, you've got to be optimistic. So the very first one, the ideal scenario is a virtuous karmic seed triggers it before you stop breathing. You die a very blissful death. You get a delicious bardo and you have a nice mummy, a nice daddy, and they come along and they've got money in the bank and they know the Buddha, they give you practices, you've got a lovely mind and a lovely environment. Great. Best first solution. Forget nirvana and Buddhahood. At least that. Do you understand? Wow, fantastic. Now, let's say you decide to give you've got compassion, but you've decided to give your organs out of compassion, and you've got lots of good karma, and then you're on the operating table about to cut you open, and then you're seeing it's happening like that lady, that freaks you out, and that can shift the karma. Suddenly, the karmic seed that was triggered can be diverted by when you finally do leave your body now, of negative karma can be triggered, That's one option. But then, okay, what can you do for that person? Because now gone to the lower realms. There's even things you can do for people in the lower realms. Doesn't mind help them immediately. And so you can do things at different stages. A person shifts, maybe move. You can do things for a person who's got negative karma that was triggered when they stopped breathing, but they're in the bardo. If you've got enough prayer, they've got enough merit, you can help shift that. There's always something you can do. There's always something you can do. Doesn't always mean we all, you see, I think we have so much attachment to everything being lovely. We want everything to be lovely. And that's why we think everyone goes to heaven, Everyone goes to heaven. Thank goodness now mummy's in peace, we say. She's lived a monstrous life. She's been a real mean lady. Now she's dead. We think now she's in peace. So irrational. We want everything to be lovely, so we've got to be realistic. But we also got to realize that everything counts, and if there's any merit there. That's why that long story that Lama Zopa always tells about that that old man who wanted to become a monk, and Shariputra, who was the best at clairvoyance, Buddha's disciple, said he had no merit to be a monk. Keep the mic. Keep the mic. Had no merit to be a monk. What's wrong? What are you saying?
I was just going to ask Mary to turn the fan on, or if the fan could be turned.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. So then this old man was miserable and depressed, and he tried to drown himself. He was so depressed because Shariputra wouldn't let him be a monk. So isn't this the story? I think I'm confused. Anyway, and Buddha came along and saved him from drowning himself. And I think he saw that he had the karma from eons ago when he was an ant or a fly, and he was sitting on a piece of caca, and because of the rains and the rainy season, there was a stupa, and the piece of caca happened to go around the stupa. This is the power of the object teaching. Okay, the fly was interested in the caca, believe me, not circumambulating a stupa. And the Buddha, and the long purpose of this story is for Lama Zopa showing that you can have incredible clairvoyance. And clairvoyance is like low-level realization that you've got to have to help people, you know. And the high beings, even he who was a Hinayana Arhat or something, still couldn't see far enough back, whereas the Buddha's mind is absolutely clear and sees everything. So there's some merit, and what merit means is some virtue in the bank that a person can be helped. So some people, you just can't access that. You know, they've got no merit in the bank, but you still have to try and do something for them. If people got some, then this is, you know, you just do what you can. That's why even when somehow like Lama Zopa Rinpoche passed away, when he said to be a holy being who's in charge of his life, he doesn't need our prayers. No way in the world he needs our prayers, but 24 hours a day for 49 days, they did prayers and practices. So we're the beneficiary as well. So it's all kind of mutually beneficial. You understand? There's always something we can do. But the key point here is because the mind is so sensitive, because there are so many karmic imprints in the mind, this is why this crucial point that Rinpoche is making, even when the person's in a coma or in a dream, you know, or in and out of consciousness, the quietness and the conduciveness of the environment to it, everything should be for the benefit of the person there. It's huge, you know, this is the point. Because things can shift easily, especially as the mind gets more subtle. It's much more vulnerable to the slightest upset. You know, so that's why don't bring your emotions into the room. We'll talk about more of that now, actually. Do you understand? There's always something we can do.
Thank you, Vin.
Someone else? Yes, sweetheart.
Wait,
excuse me.
Oh, sorry.
Yes, my dear.
We were talking about Thich Nhat Hanh, and I remember a book that he wrote called Living Buddha, Living Christ
Okay.
that I listened to. And a lot of yogis that I practice with,
What, darling?
a lot of yogis that I practice with talk about Buddha consciousness and Christ consciousness.
Which consciousness?
Buddha consciousness
the other one?
and Christ.
Okay, good. Okay, what's the question? Good.
Is
What's
that
the
anywhere in the literature that you're talking about?
Is it what in the what, darling?
In the practice that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, we're Buddhists here. We don't talk about Christ. I mean, he's been kind to people by talking about it as an equivalent, isn't he? To make people happy. You can talk like that if you like. But I mean, that's not the Buddha's teachings. Buddha didn't know anything about Christ probably when he came along. I mean, isn't it? Because Christ wasn't there yet.
Right.
So the typical of you in Tibet and studying Buddhism, which is the Buddhism we're studying here, they didn't know much about Christ. So, I mean, you could use that term if it's helpful for people who are Christian. That's very nice to talk that way, isn't it?
Well, it was actually the first time I heard it was around other Buddhists, you know, that we're talking about.
Around what?
Other Buddhists,
What do you mean by other Buddhists?
other men and women that were Buddhist.
Buddhist people, yeah. What's Christ consciousness got to do with it?
Well, sometimes it just comes up in like with that book that was written by Thich Nhat Hanh.
So what's the question about it?
Is it? Well, I already answered it.
Okay, yeah, good. Okay, darling. Thank
It's
you
not.
so much.
It's not within our purview.
No, but we should use it to be friendly, you know,
Yes.
make people happy.
Okay.
People who like Jesus. It's just fine, nothing wrong.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank
What
you.
else, people? Anybody on Zoom?
Any other
Yes,
questions?
Linda. Yes, sweetheart. Yes, Linda. Hello,
Hi,
dear.
Venerable.
Yes.
My question is also about karmic imprints, but it's quite different from the previous one 2 questions ago. I'll start by saying I'm 67 years old. I'm in late life. I came quite late to Buddhism. Before that, I was a really bad girl.
Which kind of girl? Bad.
Bad girl. And I
Naughty,
mean,
naughty Linda.
yes. I mean, I never killed anybody or committed a horrendous crime, but I was cruel, I was abusive, every klesha you
I
can
understand,
name.
darling. I understand,
Okay.
sweetheart. So what's the question?
The
Are
question
you
is,
is Linda redeemable? Is that the question?
yeah, I knew you would understand what I was asking, but
Yeah, okay.
I'm not afraid of physical death. The
So
physical
what's the
part
question, precious girl?
question is, what are the karmic imprints left? Okay, am I on the fast track to the hell realms? That's my
Okay.
question.
Okay, I understand. I understand, darling. First of all, we've got a mind that goes back and back and back. We've had lots of lifetimes and done lots of things that are positive and lots of things that are negative. So in this particular life, you came along and you said you were mean and ugly and abusive and hurt people. I understand that. But you said you didn't kill. That's good. And so now suddenly you've heard some spiritual teachings that call Buddhism and you like the idea of it. But then if you've heard the teachings, you will know that there's nothing set in stone, that Linda's mind has got Buddha nature, that there's not all the negativity that she's done. You can, the karmic that hasn't, the karma that, the fruits from those seeds that haven't ripened yet, one of the best things you can do is pull out those seeds or at least weaken those seeds. And the process is one, to live in vows, and two, to do the purification practice. So if you have that as your practice, you are putting bucket loads of powerful atomic bombs on the negative imprints. You're purifying them. And one of the key ones of the purification practice, you're not pulling out the seeds until you've realized emptiness, but you're putting atomic bombs under them and you're preventing them from ripening. So, honey child, that's the day-to-day practice. And then you can, then by putting atomic bombs under and by purifying these tendencies, preventing them from ripening as suffering, you then are able to have the space to grow virtue and goodness, grow a few flowers, and then you live your life. And then you have a good death, and a positive karmic seed will be triggered, and then you're on a roll. So, honey child, just be a bit optimistic and just practice hard and go for it. All right.
And hope for the best.
Not hope for the best. You will be the best. You will do it. Karma takes care. It's a natural law. You don't learn botany and then grow a garden and say hope for the best. You understand the logic of it, and you have confidence, and you abide by the rules, and you'll get the flowers, honey child, because botany, karma takes care, as Lama Zopa says. Lama Yeshe.
I understand.
Understand?
Thank you.
You can't just pretend to grow flowers. You can't just pretend to be virtuous. You've got to put your money where your mouth is and have some confidence in your Buddha nature.
Yeah.
Are we communicating?
Very good. Yeah.
Good, sweetheart.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Okay, so we've looked at the bit of the death process, just touched on it. We've looked at a little bit the 12 links, how that plays out at the same time, very roughly. We talked a bit about the mind and karma and why this is also important, this approach that Rinpoche has. But let's look a little bit at some of the advice at each of the stages, like, for example, let's go through death, interior. Let's look at this one, contents. So, you've got part one is sort of background, how to think about death and reincarnation, and then how we go from one life to the next, a bit of background, 12 links, the yogis, blah, blah, all this. Now, let me read you about the yogis one. This is good. I said some things about it, but let's go into more detail. This is a really helpful chapter, especially for you, those who've got already Hatha Yoga Tantra or are thinking of taking Yamataka, which is wonderful, happening soon. We'll go there. I like this chapter very much. 57. Okay. Rinpoche says, it's from 49, 54, 57. Here we go. Death is what the yogis have been waiting for. So generally, it's not permitted to openly give details of the methods that the great yogis use. However, I feel it would be useful to briefly talk about them here. So death is the moment they've been waiting for. At the point in the death process when all the grosser consciousnesses have ceased, right? And only the extremely subtle consciousness, the clear light consciousness, as discussed in the last chapter, the yogis, those who have observed karma well, kept their precepts purely, spent their lives training their minds in the clear light meditation, and have been able to recognize the base-time clear light, the imagined visualized ones, are now able to recognize the clear light of death, because they're completely conscious throughout the process, meditating on emptiness. Completely conscious, and they're able to do it in their meditation, and they surely would be able to do it in their sleep. They're truly qualified. They can remain in meditation on the clear light conjoined with emptiness for as long as they wish. 1 hour, 3 days, many months. Some meditators stay in the clear light meditation in their hermitage for years. His Holiness the Dalai Lama's Guru Ning Rinpoche, for example, stayed in meditation for 13 days. And Lama Yeshe, he stayed in meditation for 5 days. Okay. So there are many examples like this. Anyway, so by concentrating in the subtlest state without distraction, that's the microscope of your mind, right? All the encumbrances have gone, all the grosser levels of conceptuality, all the grosser levels of sensory, all the grosser levels of all the dramas have gone away. So the mind is crystal clear and subtle and refined and potent, if you can imagine that. They do not talk about this in neuroscience, okay? So there are many, by concentrating on this subtle state without distraction, some practitioners achieve enlightenment at this point. And all that means is when your mind is enlightened, fully developed, there's not a, we use this word in Australia and England a lot, there's not a skerrick. Use that term here? Very old fashioned, isn't it? There's not a skerrick of negativity left. Because the word Buddha, I love this, it's so simple, the etymology of the word Buddha or Sangye. Buddha implies the eradication from the mind of all neuroses, all negativity, all nonsense. That's Buddha's incredible finding experientially, that negativity and the dramas are completely not at the core of our being. They are not in the very nature of who we are. They are adventitious and therefore they can be removed. So then not only can we do that, we can develop to perfection, the goodness, the virtue. That's it. That's Buddha. And that mind pervades the universe, sees everything as it exists, because by definition, Buddha says mind can cognize that which exists, and whatever exists is cognizable by the mind, it's axiomatic. So delicious that. So they see the minds of all beings, all past, all future, all the karma. It's all knowable. It's all knowable. So at that level of mind, that's a level of mind that's unencumbered by the junk, that is capable of achieving all this. Okay. So by concentrating without distraction, some practitioners achieve enlightenment at this point. They actually realize the 3 bodies. This is the idea that we talked yesterday, I think. The Dharmakaya is a term in Sanskrit given to this all-knowing, all-compassionate, all-wise, all-pervasive consciousness, Buddha mind. The Dharmakaya is a term referring to that. And then the other 2 are the type of form that Buddha manifests in for our benefit that looks like us. Shakyamuni is that one, the human form, the emanation body. And then millions, that's the supreme one, the one that's like the Buddha of our time. Then all the other forms that Buddha can manifest in to be of benefit to sentient beings, like trees and carpets and dogs and ants, like the story I gave about His Holiness. They're all that little dog and that sadhu with the Namanakaya body. Then there's a subtler one, subtle light body, all these different Buddhas that you hear about in Tantra, that are knowable by the Arya Bodhisattvas, the high beings, These are 3 forms in which the mind, the body, and then the grosser body, the subtle ones, the Buddha can manifest into help sentient beings. So the death process is structured in such a way, and all the sadhanas, Lama talks about it, Rinpoche talks about it. Many Tibetan Lamas have passed away in meditation since Tibet first came into, never mind that. So now the practices these yogis do are available to those who have taken a highest Tantra initiation. Yamataka is one of those. They are the quickest methods for achieving enlightenment in one brief lifetime of this degenerate time. By doing these practices, you can collect in just a few years the merit, the virtue, the goodness that would otherwise take you 3 countless great eons to collect on the Mahayana perfection vehicle path. These practices have a very special arrangement, and doing the sadhana every day, the complete sadhana, not just simply generating yourself as a deity and reciting the mantra without the mandala, not like that, is a very important preparation for death. You'll understand this when you receive the commentaries on the generation stage and the completion stage practices, which you need to ask Geshe-la to do. and anybody else. Don's going to be teaching soon. Venerable Don, Gen Don, not Venerable. I was probably venerable, but he hasn't got the red robes. Gen Don is going to be teaching the grounds and paths of the tantric path. So you need the education on this. You need to understand the vows. You need to understand the bodhisattva vows. You need to understand all the commitments and vows you've taken when you do these initiations. Okay? When you know what you're doing, you feel better. Instead of, oh, am I supposed to do that? Am I? 10 years later, it's no good. So whether you do the long version of the sadhana or the deity you are committed to do, or the middle-length version, they both contain the essence of the generation stage practice, which is the essence of the day-to-day practice of visualizing the deity and then absorbing into you and then becoming the deity yourself, transforming the three experiences of death, intermediate state, and rebirth into the three bodies. Even the short Yamantaka sadhana, for example, has these three important points. So by meditating in this way, you prepare your mental continuum by purifying ordinary death, ordinary intermediate state, and ordinary rebirth, enabling you to actualize the path-time Dharmakaya, the path-time Sambhogakaya, and the path-time Nirmanakaya. In other words, as you go through the process of deconstructing and get to the subtle level, that's your subtle mind. And then then you're able to turn that into the Dharmakaya, the Buddha's mind. You can get enlightened when great yogis. Then when you go through the process of leaving the body and go into the intermediate state, you can transform that into the Sambhogakaya, the subtle light body. And then when you get reborn, you can transform that into the Nirmanakaya and become a person, but actually be a manifestation of the deity. Are we communicating? It's all structured. The sadhanas are all structured. And the short Yamantaka, which you'll have in your notes that Nina's given you, it's got that practice. So just by citing it with pure faith and devotion to this practice, you sow the seeds for this, Such a delicious practice. So when you just recite the words, it's, of course, a positive imprint left on the mind, but you're not strongly preparing your mind as you would if you were actually to meditate. The second Sentrab Rinpoche used to emphasize very much that if you are busy and can't do much meditation in the deity sadhanas, when it comes to your daily commitments, you should do more elaborate meditation for your main deity. You can do your other sadhanas quickly. However, if in all your sadhanas, you must do the three kayas meditation. And that you can learn, I'm sure Don can teach you that. Very simple way. Just learn how to see the deity out there, bring inside, go through emptiness, and visualize. I am the Buddha. They say there's 4 little points. I am the Dharmakaya. It is empty. It is the nature of bliss, and this is me. And a bit of meditation. That's the piece that's missing. It's so important to do. Even when you do the short succession yoga, many people do the short succession yoga, but miss that. You can't miss this. This is so important. It's if you're a Catholic, it's like missing communion. You've missed Mass. No Catholics here, obviously. What, sweetheart? Okay, so if you do any of the sadhanas, you said you're a Gelugpa, your Lama's a Gelugpa, you do some of the deity sadhanas, do you? You said you do retreat. You said you're in retreat doing meditation, not the deity sadhanas. Okay. Okay, well, that's a deity. But you don't, so that's okay. So if you don't do that practice, this is what you could do if you took the Yamantaka from the Lama that's going to be here in a few days. You could do that one. This is where you practice, basically, and it's in essence in the succession Guru Yoga. The deity is out there, like a mirror image of your own potential. And at a certain point, you bring inside you and you dissolve it. You go through the 8 stages of death, imagining, and then eventually you say, I am the Dharmakaya, I am in the nature of bliss, I am empty, this is me, and you meditate emptiness. And then out of that emptiness, you manifest as a deity. So it's practicing purifying these 3 stages, utilizing the Dharma on the way. It's so delicious. And just say the words with devotion, Lama Yeshe introduced it very simply in Introduction to Tantra. I really recommend you read that to help you understand a bit this psychology. But we get the commentary on that from Geshe. It would be so helpful, so important. Yeah, Rinpoche says, even if it's not elaborate, even if you don't follow all the extensive procedures, you should at least meditate on the last point. And that Rinpoche calls it the 4 qualities of the foundation, having the divine pride thinking. There's 4 points. This is me. This is the Dharmakaya. This is empty. It is empty. It is in the nature of bliss. And this is me. It's so sweet. Those points. And then on the day you die, because you've trained your mind by doing your sadhana every day, you're able to recognize what's happening. The 25 stages of dissolution, those 8 stages, 4 points at each point, without missing any. just as you had meditated. Because your mind is well trained, you are able to recognize the clear light. And during the intermediate state and the time of rebirth as well, you'll be able to meditate on and visualize the deity. Practicing the highest Tantra path like this, using death as a quick path to enlightenment, is incredible. It's the quickest way to purify the defilements, the dualistic view. In other words, having prepared during the generation stage, this process is what we're describing as called the generation stage. Completion stage is a more subtle level after that. On the basis of realization, on the basis of that realization, and then actualize the path-time Dharmakaya, Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya on the completion stage, actually ceasing the intellectually acquired defilements and the simultaneously born defilements. Eventually, you cut even the subtle defilements, the dualistic view. And in that moment, you achieve the result time, 3 Buddhas. You become a Buddha. This is how you can enjoy death, by using the tantric path, the quickest way to achieve enlightenment. All right? Isn't that delicious? I know. I like that chapter. Okay. Questions about that, people? So if you were thinking about it, you know, I'm sure there's going to be a chance. People had lots of meetings already, have they? About the Yamataka and am I qualified? What qualifies you? Should I do it? Shouldn't I do it? So people you feel are already content and they understand what they're doing. No? You've had preparation, lots of preparation. Okay. Remember, just to say, remember, when people say, am I qualified? Well, you know, so Lama Tsongkhapa lays it out very simply. He calls about the three principal aspects of the path. It's a different way of presenting the Lamrim. So he's saying, if you know, the prerequisites for being ready to enter into this level of practice, you have some semblance of confidence and appreciation for renunciation, which is the culmination of the second scope of practice. The sincere understanding of karma, suffering, its causes, and your ability to get rid of the causes, and a wish to become free of some suffering and its causes. That's renunciation. Some semblance of appreciation and understanding of bodhicitta. Right? This amazing shift in the mind where you only want to benefit others, and some sincere understanding of and appreciation for the third prerequisite, which is realization of emptiness, wisdom. They're the prerequisites. If you've got these 3, and then as Lama Zopa says, basically don't think you're going to get realizations, because these practices are insanely sophisticated for the most advanced practitioners. But like some miracle, they're available to peanuts like you and me, you know, these days, whatever. It's the irony of degenerate times. The best quality things are available easily, you know. I mean, Tibetans even 50, 60 years ago had to sort of walk their way to Lhasa to even lay their eyes on the Dalai Lama. We sit back in our bed with popcorn and turn on the computer, and there he is, you know. I mean, it's incredible. He even gives initiations. I turned the computer on last night after I was finished here, and he's in the middle of giving, you know, incredible blessing of Mahakala, 6-arm Mahakala, just like that. There he was, you know. Oh, there's the Dalai Lama giving initiation. Oh, aren't I lucky? You sit back and, you know, it's like a miracle. The sign of degenerate times is that good things are available easily. But because of that, we also don't appreciate them, you know. Anyway. So Rinpoche says, don't even think you're going to get realizations. Don't get any fantasies about being a tantric practitioner. It's like a gross joke. He says the main quality is having incredible, they say the word faith. Well, look at confide, confident, confide, with trust. That's the main quality to have. That means you also probably means if you're ready to do this path, going to taking Yamataka, for example, you have confidence in a teacher, you know, this really helps. A living example in front of you, who for you is the embodiment of these qualities. That gives you great confidence and that you can achieve it too. This is the whole point to Linda, you know. If you've got that, then honey child, go for it. And then you know what your commitments are, you know what the vows are, and you do your practice every day. You'll have a very happy life and a very happy death, I promise. And then you have all the tools in your toolkit to actually get enlightened. Because according to the Vajrayana system, as Lama Yeshe points out in The Bliss of Inner Fire, Tsongkhapa says it is impossible to fully develop the mind to perfection in Buddhahood, to remove all the obstacles without highest yoga tantra. Not possible. It's a technical point, not a kind of, you know, not a kind of political point. It's technical. So to take something like that is a miracle, you know, amazing to have the opportunity. Just want to say that, that's all. Yes, Manu and Tara, talk to me. Hello, sweethearts. You better unmute, Petal. Can't hear you.
Sorry. I was wondering if a non-Buddhist practitioner,
A who?
a non-Buddhist
Uh-huh.
could accumulate enough merit to be reborn in a Pure Land, or if it's necessary to practice Buddhism.
I really can't hear the words properly. I'm going deaf. I have to wear my ear things one day. Would you say it again a bit more clearly, sweetheart?
Yeah. Can you hear me better?
I
If
can
I'm
hear you.
closer? Okay.
Good. Go on.
I was wondering if a non-Buddhist could accumulate enough merit to be able to be reborn in a Pure Land, or if
I
it's
understand your point. No, I understand your point. I understand your point. I understand your point. Well, speaking technically, what we're doing is giving Buddhist terminology for states of mind, right?
Mhm.
So you could argue if you, due to past karma, have such amount of virtue and such goodness and such wisdom from past practice, I don't think you necessarily have to label yourself Buddhist. Technically speaking, it would be not impossible. In other words, it's not you have pass a test. I'm a Buddhist. Now I can do it. It's actually the labels Buddhism and all these things are just labels for referring to this particular approach. So if you, due to past karma, have this approach in your mind already, then of course you could. I'm sure you could. I'm sure it's right. Do you understand?
Yeah, thank you.
But it would mean, you see, these are practical things. It's sort of like saying, can a person climb Mount Everest? Anybody theoretically could climb Mount Everest, but then you start to realize how difficult it is and the certain conditions you have to get to Mount Everest. Then, all this is a path that's articulating all the methods of how to get to the Mount Everest of Buddhahood, or even the Mount Everest of a Pure Land. And you'd have to go through those very steps. Whether you label them Buddhist or not, I don't care. But you've got to go through those steps. You can't avoid that. Do you see what I'm trying to say? You get the point I'm making?
Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay. Someone else. Yes, sweetheart.
Venerable, there's a question on Zoom after this one.
Okay, good. After this one, yeah. Yes.
So many people when they die today, my people I know have cancer, severe cancers.
Yes.
And so they often have these like morphine pumps, and it deadens all pain. But if you're in a haze of morphine,
Yes.
whatever,
Yes.
are you able to? How does that
No,
affect?
exactly. That's a really good point. I know when I used to get these weird arthritic attacks. The Chinese doctors used to call them wandering arthritis. One morning, this joint would start getting painful, and I'd get ready for it. And by the end of the day, I'm crying on the floor in agony. Not possible to do any. The only thing would help would be steroids or opioids. It was impossible, and it would last 36 hours. So what I'm saying is, one time in Melbourne, my sister took me to her private hospital, and they wouldn't give me morphine. One hospital in Israel, they jabbed the steroids into it and it instantly fixed it. It was like heaven. But this time, they would not give me, they kept doing tests. So they gave me some morphine to deaden the pain. And it was horrible. I was hallucinating. So I thought if I was going to die now, it'd be about the worst way to die. So the crucial thing here is to do everything we possibly can to help the mind stay conscious and clear. So of course there's going to be pain. Some people die in unbelievable agony, So then you've got to find a way where you can deaden the pain, but not deaden the mind. And that's quite difficult to find a balance. But that's the ideal. I remember one time, at the same time that Lama Zopa had his stroke, and I was near Bendigo, the city in Australia where he was near our Tisha Centre. And I had to go visit a person who had cancer in a hospital and who was dying, and he was a Buddhist, and his wife would sit with him every day. She wasn't Buddhist, so she invited me to come. And you could see he was drugged out of his brain, and I had to scream Because when you're deeply unconscious, you can't hear anybody. So you got to drag the person up out of the, and I scream, not just do politely the practice, I'd just scream, John, can you hear me? And I'd say the prayer really loudly, and he'd sort of slightly cling my hand to show that he was struggling to listen. You've got to be conscious, got to be imprints there, even though you can do it within the unconscious, but it's better to be conscious if you can find that balance. And this is our trouble in the West. We say, oh, isn't she peaceful? You see the person out of their brain, but they're not peaceful, because if you're not peaceful when you're grossly awake, you're going to be unpeaceful when you're in a coma. There's no way just because you're not conscious physically doesn't mean you're peaceful. I remember one woman we visited in Florida, who was a student of Lama Zopa's, had cancer, dying in hospital, and her family were very Christian and were a bit reluctant to have us in the hospital, So we knew that she was so devoted, she wanted to hear Lama Zopa. She was out of her brain on drugs. You can see she was tossing and turning and looking very, very distressed, even though she's in a coma, or unconscious, at least, not a coma, unconscious, or drugged out of her brain mostly. So we tried to have her iPad near her with Lama Zopa's voice in it. They wouldn't let us. They said, we're disturbing her peace. But it was clear she wasn't peaceful. Do you understand? So you've got to, just because you're drugged out of your brain doesn't mean you're peaceful. So you've got to find this way where even if they're in a coma, they can still be conscious, or even if they're, so you just got to find a balance between being conscious, having a beautiful environment, peaceful environment, and also trying to use drugs to the best of your ability to balance, It's important. You understand? Yeah.
The question on Zoom. Claire, Venerable, Claire and I would like if you could please verify the 4 points that you mentioned during succession.
Okay, the first one is, you dissolve. Well, shouldn't be talking about it in public, should I? Really? Doesn't matter. Keep it simple. When you got the video, basically those practices, you got these practices. It's okay to talk in public. They're divided into the preliminary practices, which is bodhicitta and so on. Then you got the actual practice where you set up the visualization of this particular Buddha, in this case, Vajradhara. You visualize the wisdom beings coming and dissolving into him, and then you see it's the Buddha, and then you proceed to do prostrations and offerings and requests. That's where you create the merit. And then in the middle, you then bring him to the crown of your head, and you do this dissolution process of dissolving the deity into you, and that's the process of the 8 stages. You combine it with the 8 stages of death. And when you get to the 8th one, the clear light, you then say, this is the Dharmakaya. Then you say, it is empty. Then you say, it is in the nature of bliss. And then you say, and it's also sweet, this is me. Then you can do some analysis on emptiness there, whatever you want, for a few minutes. And then you stop the analysis, and then you do what they call space-like emptiness, which is not the meaning technically of emptiness, but it's used in Tantra as an analogy. So then you imagine your mind pervading the universe and the nature of bliss, completely the Dharmakaya, and this is you, and you just contemplate this space-like emptiness, no thoughts. And then out of that emptiness, you're moved by your bodhicitta at some point, 1 minute later, 1 hour later, whatever you want. And then you think, well, bodhicitta, now I'm the Buddha. It's not much use to sentient beings that can't see me, so I'm going to manifest as a body. And in the sadhanas, you actually become the deity, which is really like usually when it's longer, you do first a little seed syllable, which is the Sambhogakaya, and then you do the deity, which you visualize as the Nimanakaya, and then you finish the rest of the sadhana as the deity, like that. Okay. That's the essence. Yes, sweetheart.
What happens, it seems like there's a lot, there's a lot of attention given to your surroundings when you're dying, that you're saying it's nice and comfortable.
To help the mind be peaceful. Yeah.
And so do you have an opinion about dying alone?
Dying alone.
Yes.
Well, if the idea, dying alone, if you've got a practice and you've got your confidence in your practice, you've got confidence in your guru, you've got the confidence in the presence of the Buddhas, and you've practiced and practiced, then you just do your best to go through this process. Try to keep your mind steady and calm, as well as you can.
Yeah.
The greatest yogis, that's the best approach. Leave them alone. Don't go near them. They know what they're doing. They're expert. So, if we are ready for it, sometimes people will die alone, even if we're not the best. We have to do what we can. So obviously, the more you've practiced in your life, the easier it will be, Clear, isn't it? Yeah.
Thank you.
Good, darling. So part 3 is practices to do in the months and weeks before death. So the scenario here obviously is a person who's dying slowly, you know, like your grandma or a sick person, you know. So there's all these chapters, helping others. And so Rinpoche talks here in this first one about the importance of helping others at the time. And it's a big responsibility, he says. He said, Rinpoche says that this is Song Rinpoche, his Lama, Courtin Rinpoche, saying that people who help, who give advice and support, and especially the one who's, you know, at the time is really with the person when they're dying, they should be someone. It shouldn't be someone you dislike. In other words, if your sister can't stand you, keep away from her, please. Don't distress her by trying to help her die nicely, because she wants a person who loves her. So you've got to be close to the person, and you've got to know them very well, and because they're so happy to see you. That's important, you know. And also to ensure that attachment doesn't arise in your loved one's mind, especially when the time of death is near. Rinpoche advises that it's best not to allow anyone for whom they have strong attachment. So this is really difficult. I mean, if you're only, you know, like in my case with my sister, I wasn't the boss. You've got to be to do all this, you've got to be in charge of it. Well, I wasn't in charge. All my other sisters were running it, you know, so I just had to fit in, do the best I could. But if I'd been running that, I would have made sure that there was no noise when my sister was there. I would have had prayers and mantras playing for 3 days, all these other things. But I couldn't do that because they had other views. So you do what you can, you know. But the key one is, you know, is to have the place beautiful. She talks about use your wisdom. Your ability to help your loved ones depends upon what you have practiced throughout your life. The more you understand what you're supposed to do for your own death, the more you can help them. You know, and helping someone. Okay. Then the next one is the chapter, create a conducive environment. This is why it's so important. I mean, we have senses. So if you're a sick person in a room, and often sick rooms are a disaster, they're busy and messy and cluttered, especially in hospitals, you know, it's really not the worst place to die, with respect. So to make the place beautiful, I know I told you when Venerable Tricia Donnelly, who ran our centre in Bodh Gaya, died in hospital. She was sick. She went to the hospital in Queensland. She had cancer and be dead in a couple of months. Lama Zopa said to stay there. So she found this beautiful place, beautiful, spacious views and the sky and peaceful and trees. So there she is in bed, half conscious. She wakes up and her mind is peaceful because it's so beautiful. It makes sense, you know, to make the room so, everything in that room should be for the benefit of the person who's dying, not just for your convenience, cluttered and ugly and dark and horrible. You know, it should be light, beautiful, with nice views, peaceful. So important, because the mind, as it's getting more subtle, like I said, it becomes incredibly sensitive to the slightest noise, you know. Just like I told you about Venerable Rene, when I interviewed him in his first retreat years ago in the 90s in Spain, he said as he got to about the 5th of the 9 stages of concentration, the subtlest shift in the wind was too much for him. He couldn't cope because your mind's so sensitive. You understand our point? It's just the same as when you're dying. Your mind's getting more sensitive, more close to the mental, the sensory is going, you know. So it must be so peaceful. And the people, the only people, if you're in charge, that allow into that room are people that make the person happy, not their ugly ex-boyfriend or their cousin whom they hate and distresses them, and not their pets. This is too shocking for Americans because we confuse attachment for love, you see. I mean, we, you know, like, you know, we do love our animals, but we mostly have attachment for them. I'm sorry. And attachment is exactly what you don't want in the mind of your loved one at the time of death. So what will energize that attachment is the people and things they're attached to. So you're not trying to be a policeman, but you're trying to help their mind be peaceful, which is not to grab the attachment by having noises and sounds and televisions on and people coming in and talking and chatting. And it energizes their attachment, makes their poor mind so distressed, you know, and not their pets. Because to be attached to them, what good is that? Then you might end up being born as a pussycat. You're so attached to your pussycat. To keep them out of the way, you know. But don't be like this one fellow who was a Buddhist. He was so mean. His poor wife was dying. And he'd wake her up out of her half-sleep exhaustion 6 times a day. Do your prayers. No, do your prayers for him. Let her sleep, the poor thing, you know. That was really horrible. And if as a Buddhist, you have holy objects around, the statues and pictures of your guru, things like that. No pets, no animal skins, because you're going to energize. Animals are very connected to spirits. Spirits can be very connected to animals. So, especially cats, they say. He loves everybody. But still, it doesn't mean the cats can't upset your mind if you attach them. A calm and peace. You must not create a situation that disturbs your loved one's mind, makes them angry or upset. Don't have anyone emotional in the room, especially when the death is close. It's best that people don't cry within hearing distance. So keep your emotions out of the room, okay? It creates clinging in their mind. And you should not hold on to them, crying and pleading with them to not die. Won't keep them alive, but only agitate them and make their death more difficult. In other words, create an environment that is calm and peaceful. This cannot be stressed enough. When we think about it, when we understand attachment, it's logical, you know. Now, all the different practices, Rinpoche's got so many. The first lot are what to see and touch. So, because any sense you have, any experience of a holy object through any of the senses can be beneficial to your mind. So, for example, the first one is to see holy images. Rinpoche talks about statues, you know, see certain mantras, see the name of a mantra, you know, touch with holy objects like a text, have a text near the crown or on their heart chakra. He talks a lot about that. Bless the body with a prayer wheel. Bless the body with those blessed things, you know, blessed strings. I've got mine down here, somewhere in there, it fell off. But it's touching the skin, it blesses. Things like that. Then what to think about, next chapter, what to think about. That person's obviously, if they're still conscious, you know, you talk to them. Make sure so first of all, make sure your loved one's giving away their things. Well, that happens in our culture. We write wills. And that's really important for the person's mind, to get rid of all their things in their head, you know, not be attached to things. Talk about your loved one's guru or good or Buddha or God, if it's a Christian. You know, talk about God. God loves you. Talk about Pure Land or talk about heaven for the Christians. They look forward to it. Because as we know, attachment has many functions. One is to grasp at something and hold on. One is to live in the past. And then one is to look forward to things, which is how we spend our lives. Well, you can use that one at death. Which says it's very skillful. So talk about heaven, talk about God. Instead of holding on to this with fear, they can relax and look forward to heaven. That can only help their mind, you know. I remember, what's her name? Nancy Reagan was very attached to Ronnie, and he died. And she asked Billy Graham, will I see him in heaven? And he said, I promise you will. Then she relaxed. Let's hope it helped her. Talk about compassion. Talk about the loved one's good qualities. I think this is pretty powerful. We never praise our mothers. We hardly ever thank them. Remember their bad qualities. We're reluctant, we're kind of angry with them. Just be loving to your mum. Tell her what a good job she's done, how kind she is, and thank her. It's like a miracle. No one ever hears those words. All we hear is negativity, you know, have guilt. This is like a miracle for people's minds. Lift their mind up, make them more, oh, wow, I did a good job in my life. Amazing. No one thinks that naturally. So it's your job to tell them. It's incredible practice, that one. I mean, people tend to want to sort of, what do we call it in the West? Closure. You're determined to get to mother, to hear everything that she did mean. I mean, that's horrible. I'm so sorry. Shut your mouth. No, shut up, swallow your pride, and thank her for being a good mother. I don't care if she was. This is incredible, I think. You know, so beneficial. So if you want to clean things up and she wants to talk about things, let her, you know. But the key bottom line is to help her mind be peaceful and therefore virtuous. When the mind's peaceful, it can be virtuous. If the mind's distressed, you can't be virtuous. You can't think of love and compassion. Your mind's not spacious. And that's all the point is, you know. And you can guide them in meditations, like, you know, the practice is what to hear. So many things. Hear the names of Buddhas, hear the different mantras, thousands of mantras, Rinpoche says, you know, all these different mantras, the 10 powerful mantras, the 5 something else, the this, the that, so many. What to meditate on. And of course, you've got to know where the person's at. There's different kinds of meditations, all depending on the person, you know. It's like medicine Buddha practice, meditate using stupas, meditate on Tonglen, for the brave ones, you know, this meditation on sleep, meditation on death, meditation on emptiness. There's so many things you can do according to the capacity of the person. What to do to purify negative karma, all these practices according to the capacity of the person, you know. All these different practices. And then, of course, if they've got a practice, and they've got different practices they do, especially their highest yoga tantra, all those things, you recite them for them because their poor mind can't cope, you know. You recite the practices for them. But again, you've got to know what the person wants. Trisha Donnelly, my friend, who was very independent, she didn't want people saying their prayers to her. Another friend of mine, a nun who died in San Francisco didn't want her prayers being said, didn't want to see her Lama's picture. So you do what the people want, you know, and force things onto them. Lots of practices, so many things Rinpoche has here. Now, what to do in the hours before death. This implies, Rinpoche says, that you should at least try and be aware of this process and you recognize the signs of it, you know. You be quiet. Now that death is close, it's extremely important, essential that your loved one is not disturbed. This is the main point. You do not create any situation that upsets them. People should not cry within hearing distance in your loved one. Helping them avoid strong attachment and the other delusions during this time gives them a chance to have virtuous thoughts, you know. Only the sounds of prayers and mantras should be heard. This is talking about Buddhist death, isn't it? Obviously. Recognize the stages of death. And then the other one is this very curious one. They have this position that they say Buddha died in, lying like this with his legs out and his hand along there. They always say it's very auspicious to die like that. And they all recommend that you go to sleep at night. Even the first few minutes of it, you lie like that, create the cause. I always do that. Then I turn over. And then there are all these different things about you have special blessed substances, special pills, they taste them and all that kind of thing. They can be blessed, you know. Think about, so then you talk to them, even though they kind of have a conversation, maybe just quietly talk, or you say one of the mantras, or you talk about their guru loving them. You've got to be skillful and wise according to the person's needs, you know, just barging on top of them. Touch texts on their body or stupas, that can always help. And then also this Rinpoche's got all these things he's made, like this big sheet covered in mantras. And so you can, this is typical, Kyrgyz Central Rinpoche used to do this in one of their parts of Tibet. They wrapped the dead body, once it was dead, in this sheet covered in mantras that blessed their skin. Different prayers, you know, Rinpoche lists all these things. And then by this point as well, you should get organized when the time comes to stop breathing. You organize Courtin Monastery or your local center, or people to come and do prayers and things like that. Now, part 4, practices to do in the hours and days after the breath has stopped. There's a picture of the Buddha in can you see? In the dying pose. There's a statue in London at the London Centre. Okay, the practice to do as soon as the breath stops. So first of all, don't touch the body. The whole idea of this is that could disturb their mind, because by this point, the karmic seed has been triggered that will determine their future life. And they say that if the person, like I told you, my friend who fell off the roof, he was radiant, he was blissful. Steve Jobs was blissful. That indicates a virtuous karmic seed had been triggered and they're going to a good rebirth, you know, which is very comforting to think that. But if there's a negative seed, it could be really traumatic. They could be screaming, panicking, completely seeing like the most hideous visions of their future life, terrified. It's really quite horrific, apparently. A friend of mine, a nun in Cairns in Australia, used to sit with the dying, and she said one fellow, he became like this. She'd never seen anything like it. He was screaming like a banshee. His eyes turned red and his eyes went up into his head. He was seeing the most monstrous visions, you know, like seeing hell realms coming, because your mind's getting more subtle. So you become kind of like clairvoyant because the senses have gone. He was absolutely terrified. And then he stopped and then he died peacefully. And she asked her Lama, and he said, yeah, he probably had a hell-like experience, and then the karma shifted. That's an answer to your point, Barbara. Some karma shifted. Lama Zopa said he had a similar experience with somebody he heard about in Tibet, you know. So that's fortunate. Friend of ours, were you around when there's a fellow called John Schwartz, the time of Lama Yeshe? You heard his name? He died in Boulder Creek, but he's this Hollywood producer, movies and things. I heard, I don't know how right this is, I'm sure I heard that when he died, he had like a minute or two in the Preta realm. And then he went to the Pure Lands or something. So that's where the experience could last a long time. It's very curious. So all these things can happen, you know. So then you can begin to even see the way they die indicates, especially if they're conscious and they're like Steve Jobs, you know, or my friend, the Australian bloke. So don't touch the body. This is after they've stopped breathing. There's all these practices that he repeats every time for the different scenarios, you know. The general idea is, this is why it all sounds so funny. This is a tradition they have in Tibet. And when they stop breathing, you shout, assuming they have a teacher, a lama, you shout as loud as you can into their ear, the name of their teacher, you know. That sounds very funny, doesn't it? Very funny. Or the Buddha, or Jesus, if you like. Jesus loves you, you know, say it. special substances you put on their body or whatever, blessed pills. Or you can do this POA practice, have it done in monasteries and things, different things. So now the thing is, the series of practices, the series of scenarios in which you might die. So the practices, chapter 20, what to do if your loved one is at home when they die. Well, that's the best scenario. We can have control. You can be there for 3 days. You rotate people coming and doing prayers and practices 24 hours a day if you like, which is what they do in the monasteries, Then you can really be in control of it. Make the place beautiful. Remember, no pets, especially now the breath has stopped. You should not allow cats or dogs in the room, especially cats. As discussed in chapter 12, cat hair is said to be polluted. Also, if a cat sits on the dead body, it's possible a spirit could follow it and enter into the body. Because spirits are about attachment. They'll grab this opportunity to have a body, That's what zombies are, aren't they? Be quiet. Most important. Offer lights. Always have lights off. And then there's all these different practices. He repeats these in every scenario, but you do what you can of them, Touch, put a holy object on. And there's different practices. Medicine Buddha. There's many, many practices you can choose. Because you've got the 3 days, you can be more spacious with it. And then when there's time, after the 3 days, to get rid of the body, now you can prepare the body for cremation or burial. Before you do that, you would then target the crown of the head, back in there, or pull. Just in case the consciousness is still there, to encourage it to leave, and then in that case, it could be a Pure Land rebirth. They say like that. And of course, typically for the Tibetans, you'd consult a Tibetan astrologer. One of the books Rinpoche quotes a lot from here is a book written in Dharamsala by a Tibetan for the sake of Tibetans, about all of these rituals and learning what to do. And then you prepare your loved one's body because the mind is gone now. So it's just the body, prepare it for cremation. The next scenario will be if your loved one is in hospital when they die. That I said is much more difficult because one of the key things there, I think, is the same practices, but you do what you can, even just for 30 minutes, Rinpoche says. Because you're not going to have a lot of time because they're desperate for the beds, for the other bodies, other people, sick people. But, the important thing is if they're in hospital, you negotiate. I've noticed in hospitals and nurses and doctors and people are very kind to do what you want for the body, So if you're going to be going in there occasionally and the people on night duty, you should let people know exactly what to do. Do not, if they stop breathing, do not touch the body. Call me immediately, even 3 a.m. Do not do anything. Leave them alone. Things like that, You can even have prayers on an iPad playing and you can ask the nurses to keep playing them. You can do all these things according to the nurse's capability. Of course, it's in a ward, it's difficult, isn't it? That's the trouble. If they're in their own room, it's better. But you keep your wits about you. You don't hand over the power to the hospital. So if you are there day and night, you can do all these practices in the bed as well as you can for the dying person. But if you come in the middle of the night, then you can, and then you check with the hospital in advance, so you can need as much time as possible to keep the body without disturbing. And if they're not busy, they'll allow you. It's very kind. Lama Yeshe passed away in Los Angeles, in Cedars Sinai, and the doctors and nurses were so kind, Lama Zopa said. So when he passed away at dawn on the morning of March whatever it was, Losar, Tibetan New Year, 1984. The nurses and doctors were so kind and gave him another room where he was able to lie there in meditation all day, and all the students were around with him. And they had to leave by 5 p.m. Then his body was driven very slowly up the coast of Vajrapani Institute, So if you can in the hospital, you do what you can, even as 30 minutes, Rinpoche said, do what you can, these prayers. And then you do this one every time. But the other thing you can do, you can ask them to put the body in the fridge. So my sister, because she died, they had to do an autopsy. So they had to put her in the fridge. And that's handy because you're not going to bury the body yet. So you can even do that if you like, negotiate with the hospital. If they can't keep them in the bed, you wheel them very gently and stick them in the fridge for 3 days so you can do all the prayers at home. You understand? Leave them in peace. You understand? That's really helpful. Because it's ideal to leave for 3 days. If you know with certainty the consciousness has gone, a friend of mine who worked for me for the prison project in San Francisco when I did it, she had a bad car accident, and then somehow she went into a coma in the hospital. She was put on life support. Her mummy and daddy were there. She was only about 30. And then they wanted to pull the plug on her, or didn't want to. I can't remember, wanted to, whatever. But we wanted Geshe Dagpa to come, so he came. And just before he got there, they were keeping her breathing. Her lungs exploded. and her eyes opened wide, and then she stopped breathing. So by the time he got there, I remember his attendant was on text, and I said, "Has her mind left the body yet?" And Geshe-la said, "Yes, it seems like it." So because of that shock, Alison, remember Alison? Yeah, because of that shock, they must have forced her mind to go quickly out of the body. It just went very quickly. You understand? So as long as you can in the hospital, if you can. But I said it's really not the best place to die because it's so noisy and busy and all these other suffering people. Really ideal. If you're in a hospital, at least get your private room. A friend of mine, Australian person, do you ever meet, what's her name? I can't remember, it doesn't matter. Her husband died and she was in a nursing home, private room. And when he started to die, she shooed out all the doctors and nurses, locked the door and spent 3 days with him. If you can do that, perfect. Or another hospital in Adelaide I went to, is a Vietnamese family. Private room. They kept him for 3 days and I came in to do prayers. I remember the nurses and doctors will sneak in, have a little look, they were interested in what was happening. So if you can have that, that's perfect. Of course, it costs money to have a private room in a hospital, doesn't it? Do what you can. Do what you can all the time. And what to do. The same practices, but according to what you can do, The next one is if your loved one has offered their organs. This is where it gets tricky. I talked about this one. The first one really praises people who have the incredible compassionate thought to offer their organs. He says almost like bodhisattvas who give their bodies, so special to do that. But the danger is, as I expressed, I told you about that book I was reading when I was doing this book called The Undead, this medical journalist, Nick Teresi. And this book, like I told you, his expertise is death. And he'd done all his research into this business of when death occurs and then not taking the organs. He actually was quite cynical about the process because of the elitism and the arrogance and the pushing people to give their organs and so on and so forth. But it was really showing the contradictions, like I said, in America, at least in the hospitals and the systems, when death really is. People coming back to life, which we've always been reporting for centuries. This is just too inconvenient. You can't explain it, The person's dead, no heart, no movement, and they come back to life when they're middle about to cut off their liver. It's most inconvenient, So that's a really good point. And the other one is, I told you, he had this chapter on people. He's an atheist himself. He has no opinion about these things, but he's always very funny about it. He had a lot of humor. All these people who have out-of-body experiences while they're on the operating table, Of course, it's not out of body at all. The experience is vividly out of your body, but it's your mental consciousness. You think about this. When we have memories, think about this. You're looking on, aren't you? You're never inside yourself when you have a memory. You're looking on at the event. You hear what I'm saying? You're visualizing the event. That's what the mental consciousness does, seems to me. And that's what's happening in these visions. You're looking on at something. You understand what I'm saying? When you have a memory, you don't remember what you're feeling vaguely, but it's really the event. And you're watching it, even yourself. I think that's what mental consciousness does. So anyway, this whole chapter, and he said, of course, people are very cynical and say, don't be ridiculous. So someone told them what happened, like they heard the voice, they heard what the doctors talked about, they heard the music they were playing. But he talked about one woman, I mentioned this to you, who had to have such a dramatic procedure, stop all her organs. And they said and they were convinced that from her point of view, there's no way she could have any experience. But he said she had the most vivid experience of all. And they just can't argue with this. As one doctor in this business said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but I can say that. So I think it's great that people are looking at these things. He interviewed all these Buddhists and different religions, but he never interviewed a Tibetan Buddhist. It was a great pity because this stuff fits in with what he's saying, So anyway, I told you the story, this one woman who was giving her organs. So we can assume she died peacefully. She's giving her organs. She's very happy. She had a nice stop breathing. The karmic seed had been triggered, but they keep her breathing, which means her mind is there. Whereas in the West, they say she's dead. But as Lama Zopa says, if you can keep a person breathing, it's not possible if the mind isn't there, the subtle consciousness. Not possible. So if they were actually dead, you could never get it to breathe, Not possible. Yeah. Yeah, Paul. Yes. Microphone.
So with the example you just gave, right? Somebody's on the operating table, their mind is still there.
In the body.
Right.
But
and
it's
the-
having a vision of what's below. They're seeing it as if you're above. Yeah. Go on.
They're cutting him open to,
What?
they're cutting open the body to take the organs. Would, couldn't it be positively viewed if the motivation of that person was, oh, this is wonderful, they're taking my organs out
Yeah.
and they're going to save a bunch of lives.
Yes.
So I'm fine watching that.
That's fine. If a person, that's the interesting point, Paul. That's the point. The same as the question about dreams or the bardo. If you've got that level of awareness because you've been a practitioner, then of course, how incredible. That's the whole point. If a person has that level, but most of us don't have that level of realization. So when we see someone cutting our body open, so that's the story. You've heard it. I haven't told it for everybody. But what happened was this woman, she was on the operating table, and the moment they got the circular saw to cut her open, the nurse monitoring the heartbeat said the beat went from 100 to 200 beats a minute. And the author said, joking, I wonder what a dead person has to worry about. So all I'm doing is deducing that she was having an out-of-body experience, even though she was technically dead, because her subtle mind is still there. But of course, unless you're a highly realized practitioner, if someone's coming at you with a knife, sweetheart, unless you're a yogi, you'll be panicking. Well, it's the same as you like that. So she probably had a panic attack, which means shifted the karma, which then triggered a negative karma and went to the lower realms. And that's why Lama Zopa says, I said, when I told him about this in the chapter, I said, what advice do you have? He said, the hospitals need to be careful. But I mean, not everybody will have that experience. Most people won't have that experience, and they will die very peacefully and get the nice human rebirth, and their heart gets used. But that's the danger. That's the only why it's dangerous, because it can freak the person out, and then they can shift the karma and then get a suffering rebirth. Do you understand the point? Because if you're a yogi, it'll be exactly that. It'll be like that if you're a yogi. No problem, Paul. Yeah, and he says he really praises people who do this. Yeah. So the same duty practice. But what he said was interesting. I asked him. He said it is possible that even after your organs have been cut out, it's still possible that your mind is still there. So when you get the body back, you can continue to do practices and things. That would be ideal. That lady, the 200 beats one, her mind went zapping out that instant, probably because she got such a shock, like my friend, when her lungs exploded. Do you understand? Because it's such a shock. So even that's possible, depending on the organ. That's an interesting point. The next one is if your loved one dies suddenly. So of course, this is what we what?
Sorry,
Someone,
Venerable.
okay, good, go on.
Scarlett.
Talk to me, Scarlett.
Scarlett, thank you.
Yes, sweetheart.
Sorry. Venerable, this is all so wonderful to listen to. And you know, I don't know how fortunate I would ever be for these things to happen. So is it like, do you recommend writing some things down and leaving? Because I think my family would be really freaked out with what I'm
Writing something down, what?
writing
saying?
down some of the things that you talk about and like leaving it or like
Absolutely. Don't people call that a living will? You should tell people exactly what you want to do and not to do. This is really important, Scarlett. People do that all the time now. You must do exactly that. Yes.
okay, thank you.
All right. Okay. Absolutely. If your loved one dies suddenly, this again is the problem because you haven't prepared for it. You should be prepared. Have your wits about you. So if your hubby drops dead in the soup, don't panic. Check his body, do that business of breathing, do all that. But meanwhile, say mantras, keep your wits about you. And this is an interesting point. A friend of mine who died in Santa Cruz years ago, Paul, his wife was a Buddhist and his daughter was a Buddhist. So he had a really bad heart and he got his wife to promise that if he had a heart attack, don't call the ambulance. But she panicked and she called the ambulance. Then it's too late, So they drive him to the Santa Cruz hospital. The daughter and I got there at 4 a.m. We're doing all the prayers Paul wanted. He was wired up. You knew he didn't want it. He was distressed. So we did all the prayers he wanted and they pulled the plug, because he wanted to be just left in peace to die naturally. Say all the prayers. So then the doctors were very nice. They put him in, it was on a bed where there was a bag underneath. It's all very convenient. So they zipped up the bag, put him they wouldn't let us stay in the hospital. So they took him to the mortuary. And then we got to the mortuary, they put him on a bed, and we spent all day there doing prayers. And then at 4 o'clock we had to go. We couldn't stay all night. And so we gave them a CD of the Gyuto monks chanting, and they promised they'd play it in the fridge. So whether they did or not, I'm not sure, But we came back next morning and all the other dead people would have heard the Gyuto monks chanting. We're very happy. So we did that for 2 days. So there's different things you can do to have that time before you cremate them and bury them. Do you understand my point? So that was, but really, if someone dies suddenly, at least, sure, try to help them keep alive, but do other things. If you stop by an accident, people have that, stop by a car accident, say mantras, do what you can, as well as helping their body, And the other one is, of course, if your loved one has high realization and is meditating at the time of death. Well, the first thing to do with them is get out of their way and close the door. They know what they're doing. Leave them in peace, So it's a very nice talk about here about Lama Yeshe and everything. So as I discussed in chapter 10, people with high tantric realizations can remain in meditation in the clear light conjoined with emptiness for as long as they wish. 1 hour, 3 days, many months. Some meditators stay in the clear light meditation in the hermitage for years. This is possible. I remember one Lama, remember I talked about him in this book, who's one of his Lamas and a close friend of Lama Yeshe's, this great yogi. When he passed away in Dharamsala, in meditation, commonly they sit in, so do that. You die in full lotus position, okay, baby? That'd be very auspicious. He's in meditation. And I saw photos. He was in meditation for a few days, maybe 10, I can't remember. But there were photos of each of the days. And by the end of the last days, each day, because he's no longer got his sensory consciousness, his body's shrinking. So by the 10th day, his body's really small, his little head poking up above his cloak, because the body dramatically shrinks. It's very curious. But he was meditating for those 10 days, So anyway, if your loved one's got high realization. So however, if the meditation, okay, if your loved one is in meditation, you must not disturb them. The face of the meditator is very radiant, peaceful, even blissful. They look magnificent, totally different from an ordinary dying person. So if the meditation is not over, but for some reason, such as the country's laws, you have no choice but to move the body, you need to request the meditator to end their meditation. So while you are requesting them, you can offer music with cymbals or bells and things like this, and so forth. So Song Rinpoche advised Lama Zopa when Lama Yeshe was in meditation to do this. So you could recite, or you could recite the Gyu Samaja Root Tantra. That'll take you 8 hours. So, it's hard to use that in a hurry. So more simply, you could simply put incense very close to their nose, and then it's very auspicious to recite the prayers, they be reborn in a pure land. So Lama was in meditation on this bed in the hospital room until 5 p.m., and they had to leave. So they very gently took him. So in the case of some holy beings, such as Ling Rinpoche and Lama Yeshe, even though their bodies were moved several times, their meditation did not cease, and they were not disturbed. So Lama Yeshe passed away at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, a wonderful hospital. Before Lama passed away, the nurses were watching intently throughout the night. The moment Lama's heart stopped, people rushed in with a defibrillator and wanted to try to get it started again. It was all very hectic. I had checked with Song Rinpoche, who earlier had come to be with Lama, but now was back in Switzerland, and he said to do everything possible to save Lama. The defibrillator is very strong. It pulls the body up violently. Lama opened his eyes for a moment, then his body fell back down. The doctor then said there was no hope. It was about 5 in the morning, and that was at New Year's Day, March something in 1984. This was my first time dealing with someone passing away in the West. I'd had no experience. Well, apparently they usually take the body to the mortuary where they prepare it. But I didn't think we needed to do that. That's for ordinary people. Remember at the time, they consulted some, because they took it from Los Angeles to up to the Redwoods, Vajrapani, and they consulted some funeral home who you just paid $2 and they let you do special. You can't do that now. You were able to take the body from the hospital and then do your own trip, your own special, funeral service. I think you can't do, even with my friend in Santa Cruz, we couldn't take the body back. At Lama's time, they could, which is very fortunate. They had the body from the hospital and they got permission from this funeral home to do a special thing. So all the ceremonies were held at Rajapani Institute over many days. And people from all over the world came. So Lama didn't need all of this, he says, I asked Song Rinpoche what should be done to release Lama from his meditation. As I mentioned, Rinpoche advised me to play instruments, and so I made 3 prostrations. I rang a bell, and I requested Lama to stop his meditation. I also recited the prayer to be born in the Pure Land from the Vajrayogini practice, and I touched Lama's crown. Of course, Lama didn't need all of this. He's already achieved the clear light and the illusory body, all the high realizations. Apparently there was, anyway, they put Lama's holy body in a box packed in ice, and it took it to a mortuary. The box looked very dirty to me, and the body was covered by what looked like an animal skin, like the Tibetan nomads would use. The next day, probably rubber or something, you know. The next day, one of the students very slowly drove it the 350 miles north to Lama's center near Boulder Creek, Vajrapani Institute. It was kept in the Gompa. I remember that Gompa we had there. It was kept in the Gompa. And at first it was in the side room. When I came to America in 1994, that was my office. I remember that, where Lama's coffin had been. But during that 5 days of these ceremonies, Lama's body always smelled very sweet. There was no stink at all because he was meditating the whole time. So when they were preparing Lama's body for the burning offering, puja, a very special puja, I think, rated to some of the deities, takes all day. All these substances, very special. Up on the hill, they prepared this. So Losang had been one of the monks from the first Gelugpa monastery at Bodhanath in Nepal, and who was familiar with the rituals, reported to Song Rinpoche that even though the body had been lying in the coffin for many days, Lama's limbs were very flexible. It was he who prepared the holy body in the Tibetan way, putting on the self-initiation costume with the crown, bell, and vajra, and putting the legs and hands in the right position. He explained to Song Rinpoche that it was only when he moved Lama's legs that the white bodhicitta came out from his secret organ or his nose. I can't remember. So in other words, it seems that Lama had been in meditation state for at least 5 days. So Lama told some, and never mind that one. So if the body of a meditator will start to smell when the meditation is finished. In other words, when the mind leaves, just like the bodies of ordinary people, you know. As with ordinary people, the red and the white drops coming out of the body is a sign that the meditator's mind has left the body. But both drops don't necessarily come out, such as with Lama. Okay. So many great practitioners become enlightened in the intermediate state, even after they leave the body. Many others reincarnate in human form again in order to help sentient beings, as Lama Yeshe did. Great practitioners such as Lama, they can choose their parents and the environment they will be born into, and the child they become is completely different from normal people. So now, yeah, that's all that, up to the time you're ready for the cremation. And I think there's plenty more to talk about tomorrow. So are there any questions, please? Yes, Don. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious. I've never heard any teachings on it, but it would make sense that a lot of times at death, people have a catheter or they have an IV, or even with COVID, we saw many people who were intubated.
Yeah.
You would advise probably not to remove those things once death occurs.
Oh, no, that's a really good point, isn't it? Because we're doing a reprint now of the paperback, and I'm supposed to have the wisdom. There's a lot of extra teachings Rinpoche's given. I really should look into that and see if there's any advice he's given, because you would think that you wouldn't disturb the body, you just leave it, isn't it? It's true.
Right.
That's a very good point. That's a very common thing.
Especially the catheter, because if you're pulling downward and the
that's really
consciousness
intense,
leaves
isn't it?
down,
That's a really good point. I've got to really see if there's there's any advice Rinpoche's given. Otherwise, I might have to do a footnote or something for someone else.
Okay.
It's a very good point, Don. Thanks.
I was just curious.
That's a really good point, because it could really disturb the person, couldn't it? Right in this, in the sex organ, it's incredible. So it's the central channel. That'd be very distressing. It's a good point. Okay, I'll check on that. Thank you for that. Thank you. Anybody else? So there's different signs that the mind has left. The typical one mostly used, the one that mostly used, and I tried to do this with my sister, but I wasn't with her long enough because her heat was still in the core. They say after 3 days, everything else is frozen cold. But if it's still warm at the heart chakra, right here, that shows the mind is still there. If it's cold there, the mind is gone. That's one sign. The other one is this red and the white drops coming out, either through the nose or through the sex organ. Another one is, if rigor mortis starts, that shows the mind has gone. There was Lama for 5 days and there's no rigor mortis,
Venerable, we have a question from space as well.
Okay, go.
I don't know, maybe this is more appropriate for tomorrow.
Sit closer to the mic, can't quite hear.
Maybe this is more appropriate for tomorrow.
Okay, go.
But I know whenever I've heard teachings about dying, one of the main things is for people, the loved ones, to let go. To let the dying person go and not cling. Not,
You mean while you're in the room with your loved one?
yeah, not,
This is totally important.
I mean,
yes.
I don't even mean physically, but
No, if you so
emotionally.
if you're in your own home and your mummy's in the hospital, have your sadness, but it's not going to affect your mother. But if you're with her, absolutely watch your mind really carefully and be quiet and keep your emotions to yourself. Yes.
Because I had some friends in Arizona who one of the partners was dying and the other partner was just clinging emotionally.
Yeah.
Saying, oh, well, we have to go down to Tucson. And the woman who was dying, all she would wake up was for more pain pills. She wasn't going to.
I'm a bit confused what you're saying. This last part is important here. Can you get closer to the mic?
Oh,
Just
sorry.
say that part again. The friend died. What?
The partner who was alive kept saying, oh, she's.
So where is, I need to know if the partner is with the dying.
They're in the same room.
They're in the same room.
Yeah.
And the dying partner is awake or not conscious.
Not conscious.
So the person is unconscious, and what's the other partner saying?
She's saying, oh, she has to go down. We have to go down to Tucson.
What for? What are you talking about?
Oh, a business thing.
She's chatting away about going to Tucson. What do you mean? I don't understand your point.
The point is that the person who was not dying was not letting go.
What do you mean by not letting go? I don't understand why you're talking about Tucson. What does that mean they're not letting go?
They were in Prescott.
Huh?
She said her partner needed to go to Tucson.
You mean the partner, the dying person needed to go? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So why was she saying the dying person needed to go to Tucson?
Some kind of business.
What do you mean business? She's dying. I'm really
I
confused.
know.
What are you talking about then? What are you talking about then?
I'm talking about the person who was not dying.
But I don't understand why you're saying the dying person has to go to Tucson for business and they're dying.
I know.
What do you mean then? It just doesn't make sense to me. No, please wait, please.
The person who's not dying is not letting go.
So what you mean is they're pretending the person's not dying?
Yes.
Well, that you didn't say it. You've got to say that. It's a very different thing. Between not letting go, which means, darling, don't die, and actually not believing they're dying, they're very different. So now I understand.
Okay. So what?
Thank you.
What do? If
You're not in charge, honey, because you're not the partner, so you can't do much.
Right.
Except while you're not in the room, you can help her realize. I mean, in other words, she literally didn't believe the dying one was dying.
Right.
Okay, that's difficult, isn't it? That's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now I understand what you're saying. That's really heavy. That's right. And saying it out loud in the room, the poor person's dying. God Almighty.
Okay.
I mean, if you're their friend and they listen to you, you give them a bit of a talk. But you can't. I mean, some people live in denial of their own death. Other people do what you just said. That's very hard to shift when there's so much attachment, isn't it?
Yes.
Now I understand. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm glad I persevered. Okay. What else, people? It's only 3 o'clock and we could finish. We've talked so much.
Are you
It's a heavy topic. Go on.
Question. Thank you, Venerable.
Yes, sweetheart.
But I was once with a dying person and she was Jewish, so I was doing like a Jewish mantra type thing. And then someone rushed in as she was already, dying, and there was a caregiver there. And when this woman rushed in and she said, Mrs. Donna, the caregiver said, shh, let her go. Let her, like she shushed this woman. So like I would feel confident shushing someone who like was rushing in and very emotional. I would say to them, if it wasn't the partner, I would say, let her go. Just let her go.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yes.
We have another question, Venerable. Thank you.
Okay. Go, darling.
Thank you.
Hi. Well, when my mother was dying, I wouldn't let her go. And she was really mad at me because she wanted to go and I kept stopping her.
How did you stop her?
By refusing to let go.
What did you do to stop her?
I don't understand that, but I didn't.
What do you mean you don't understand that? Did you say words to her? Trying, don't die on me,
Yes,
mommy?
yes, stay here.
So then how long did she last after that?
She had a near-death experience. She described it as going down the tunnel,
I understand, yeah.
seeing the light,
I understand, yes.
Doing
How long
the
did she take
balance.
to die after you were crying and begging her not to?
and I didn't want her to
I know,
go.
but how long did she take to die?
About 4 days.
Okay, you finally let her die.
Finally, I let her go.
Well,
I
it shows the
realized that
suffering of
I was
attachment, John.
doing that
That shows the suffering of
for
attachment and how
her.
that shows the suffering of attachment and how it harms the poor dying person. So keep our own stuff out of it. I always like to say that this is the dying person's gig. Let them be. Everything should be there for their benefit. That's the point he's stressing here. We're so emotional and self-centered, you know.
Yes.
It's not easy for us, is it? Thank you, darling.
Thank
You know, I think we've got enough. It's only 3:05. I'm not trying to shortchange you, but I shout loud and talk quick, and there's a pretty intense topic. So I think it's good to finish. Don't you think so? We said we'd do TOG at 3:45. Maybe we can do TOG at 3:15 now. So anybody who wants to come and join us for TOG, we're doing it at 3:15. At 3:30, okay? On Zoom or here, we're offering quick budget up at TOG. 3:30. Yeah. Okay. So people, we get the prayer up, please. Thank you. So we think if there's any advice today to help us learn to be ready to help other people die, but of course to help us be ready for our own death, start practicing now so it won't be as scary. If you have your sadhanas, do them. Keep your vows, keep your commitment, keep your samadhi pure, and you will have a blissful death. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings, without exception, into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish and increase more and more and more and more. In this Holy Lama, the wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single happiness and benefit in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. This prayer written by His Holiness, for Lama Zopa, peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Lozang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. Such a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the waves of bodhicitta, of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you, precious people. See some of you tomorrow, all being well. And when you go to bed tonight, like when you hit the pillow, you say, may I see my dreams as dreams, and then be marvelous. And if you wake up in the morning, you bliss out that you're still alive. And you vow not to waste this day and come to the teachings, and we keep listening. Okay. Thank you, people.